The jungle was loud and dark, full of strange sounds and moving shadows. Jace held his knife in one hand and kept the torch high in the other. Leaves brushed against his face, wet and cold, as he pushed through the thick green plants behind him. Rylana followed closely, her alien eyes scanning the trees above and the ground below. They were far from the crash site now. The smoke from their destroyed ship had disappeared behind the mountains. No signal, no help, just this alien jungle and whatever lived inside it. Their mission had failed, but surviving was the new goal. Rylana didn't complain, even though her leg was bleeding from a fall earlier. She was strong, proud, and quiet the kind of warrior Jace had only read about in reports. Her dark blue skin shimmered with sweat, and her breathing was slower than before. But she said nothing, only kept moving. Suddenly, she froze. Jace turned. "What is it?" Before she could speak, something shot out from the trees, fast and green like a whip. Rylana gasped, dropped her weapon, and fell to the ground. Clutching her upper thigh, Jace ran to her side. What happened? She opened her mouth, but only a whisper came out. Snake. Venom. Very bad. Her body was already shaking, and the skin around the bite turned black and purple. Jace looked down, saw the small snake slithering away with glowing green eyes. He wanted to chase it, but there was no time. Rylana's eyes rolled back, and her breath came in short, painful gasps. He pulled out the medkit empty. The crash had burned everything useful. His hands trembled as he looked at her wound. The bite was just above her knee, on the soft inner part of her thigh. It was already swelling, and he could see the poison spreading under her skin like black lightning. "She'll die in minutes," he whispered to himself. He looked at her face, pale and wet with sweat. "I'm sorry, but I have to do this," he said. Without wasting another second, Jace dropped his gear, tore the fabric of her pants carefully. The wound was ugly, swollen, and filled with thick greenish blood. He pressed his mouth against it and began to suck. The taste was bitter and burned his tongue. His lips went numb, and his vision blurred a little. He spat out the poison, again and again. He did it for nearly a minute, until the swelling stopped growing. Rylana groaned, her hand twitching as if trying to stop him, but she was too weak to speak. Too weak to move, Jace finally pulled back, breathing hard, his mouth tingling and his heart racing. "I hope that worked," he whispered, wiping his lips. He looked around. The jungle was getting darker, and cold wind was rising. He knew they couldn't stay there. Not with her half-conscious and bleeding. He lifted her onto his back, grunting under her weight. She wasn't heavy, but he was tired, his body sore from the crash and the long walk. Still, he moved forward, pushing through the trees like a beast with one goal. Somewhere in the distance, a strange howl echoed through the jungle. It didn't sound like a snake, sounded like something bigger, something hunting. Jace didn't stop, not even when branches scratched his arms or his boots slipped in the mud. He needed to find shelter, a cave, anything, and fast. Rylana's head rested on his shoulder, and her breath tickled his neck. Her skin was burning hot, her fever rising. Jace muttered, "Don't die on me." Not after all this, after nearly an hour. He saw a small hill with rocks piled at the base. He found a gap between them just wide enough to crawl into. Inside, it was dark, dry, and cool. He laid her down gently, covering her with his coat. Then, he lit a small fire with what little dry wood he had left. As the flames grew, he sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. She was still alive, but barely. Outside, the jungle whispered and roared, as if angry that he had stolen one of its victims. Inside the cave, Jace whispered softly, "You're not dying tonight." He didn't know if she heard him, but her fingers moved slightly. That was enough for him to keep hoping. He leaned back, Against the wall, knife in hand, eyes half closed, ready to fight if something came. And praying that the venom was truly gone, Jace didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. His back rested against the cold stone wall, but his ears were wide awake. The jungle outside hissed and groaned like it was alive. Something heavy had walked near the cave twice, once dragging something behind it. Jace gripped his knife tighter each time, praying it wouldn't enter. The fire had died down to a weak glow, but he didn't dare leave Rylona alone to find more wood. She was breathing, but her skin was burning hot, her body shaking every few minutes. He kept checking her pulse, wiping her forehead. Whispering her name over and over, Rylona didn't respond, but once. Her lips moved like she was dreaming. The venom had been strong. He could feel some of it still tingling in his own jaw. His tongue was numb, and his throat itched with every swallow. But he was alive, and so was she. That meant what he did was working. Or at least gave her a chance. As dawn broke, thin light poured through the cracks in the rock. The fog outside was thick and silver, and the jungle looked more alien than ever. Jace rubbed his face, stood up slowly, and stretched his sore limbs. Then he turned to her and froze. Rylona's eyes were open, just barely. Her lips moved again, and this time he heard it clearly. "You saved me," she whispered. Jace rushed to her side. "You're awake." She blinked slowly, then tried to sit up, but groaned in pain. "Don't move too much," he said. "You're still weak." She looked down at her leg, saw the torn fabric, the bruised skin, the dried blood. Her face turned red. Or at least the alien version of red. "You sucked the venom out," she said, voice soft but sharp. Jace nodded slowly. "You were dying, Rylona." There was no time for a moment. She was quiet. Then she smiled. "Just a little. I would have done the same," she said, though her voice trembled. Jace laughed under his breath. "Yeah, I doubt that," but then he paused. "Actually, maybe you would." She reached out, fingers brushing his arm. "You could have left me," she said. "No one would have blamed you." He shook his head. "I don't leave people behind." Her eyes studied him closely, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered something in her own language, like a short prayer. Jace didn't ask what it meant, but he knew it wasn't just words. Suddenly, a sharp sound came from outside the cave. Both of them tensed. Jace grabbed his knife again and stood in front of her. A heavy shape moved past the cave's opening, slow and dragging. Then it stopped and sniffed. Long and wet like a hound. Jace's heart pounded. He held his breath, and Rylona, still weak, reached for a small blade tucked in her boot. Whatever it was, it didn't enter. Just stood there for a moment. Then shuffled away into the mist. They didn't speak until the sound was gone. Jace looked back at her. "We can't stay here long." Rylona nodded. "Help is far, but there's a relay station east." "How far?" "Maybe 2 days, with my strength." "Maybe more." Jace nodded. Thinking fast. "I'll carry you," he said, without waiting. "You rest until nightfall. Then we move." She didn't argue. Didn't say she was too heavy or that he was too weak. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Jace sat beside her again, not too close, but not far either, for the first time. She seemed less like a soldier and more like a person, someone who had nearly died, and now saw the man beside her in a different way. Not just a human, not just a teammate, outside. The fog began to lift, and the sun peeked through the trees. But the jungle was still watching, still waiting, and so was Jace, knife in hand, ready to do whatever it took to keep her alive. He didn't know if they'd survive the next 2 days. But one thing was sure, he'd already done the unthinkable to save her, and he wasn't going to stop now. The jungle was changing again, its voice now deeper, slower, as if something inside it had just woken up. Jace felt the shift in the air, heavy and strange. Like the sky was pressing down on them, Rylena was asleep, or maybe just unconscious. Again, her forehead wet with sweat, her skin turning pale blue. He touched her arm gently, and it felt cold beneath the heat of the fever. He had wrapped her in his own coat, built a second fire with dry bark, and laid her carefully against the warmest wall in the cave. But even then, the heat couldn't chase away the shaking in her body. She whispered strange words in her sleep, words he didn't understand but could feel like fear. Or maybe pain. He sat beside her, knees pulled close, holding a small rock. In his hand to stay awake, he hit the rock lightly against the floor, over and over. Just to hear something that wasn't her breathing, he felt useless. And that feeling was worse than the jungle itself. He had pulled venom from her leg with his mouth, carried her half a mile through screaming woods. And still it wasn't enough. What if she didn't wake up again? What if he just sat here while... She slipped away, one slow breath at a time. A sound broke the silence. Dry and sharp, like twigs snapping. Jace froze, listening, but didn't move yet. The fire cracked behind him, and Rylena let out a soft groan. She turned her head slightly, her face twisting in a wince. "Water," she whispered, almost like wind through leaves. Jace reached into the small metal canteen tied to his belt, unscrewed the top, and held it to her lips. She sipped once, then twice, before coughing and pulling away. "Hurts," she said, voice thin as paper. "You're gonna be all right," he whispered. "Just stay with me, okay?" She blinked slowly, her pupils trying to focus. "You look tired," she mumbled, and a weak smile appeared at the edge of her mouth. He laughed quietly. "You should see yourself." The smile faded, and her eyes fluttered shut again. Then, the jungle groaned once more, louder this time, and something thudded in the distance. Jace stood up, grabbing his knife. Moving to the mouth of the cave, he didn't step outside, just peered through the gap between stones. The trees were still, the mist rising like breath from the ground. Then a shadow moved between two trunks, large, fast, and too quiet. He stepped back and reached for the torch. Unlit now, he dipped it into the fire, letting the flame catch slowly. The second it lit up, something in the trees let out a growl. Deep and bone-shaking, Jace turned fast, holding the torch high and the knife close. He moved back to Rylena's side, blocking her with his body. He didn't know what that thing was, but he knew it was coming closer. The firelight flickered, dancing along the cave walls like ghosts. Then two glowing yellow eyes appeared just outside the cave entrance. Not human, not animal either. They stared through the mist, unblinking. Jace didn't move, didn't speak. He stood between the girl and the beast, heart beating like a drum in his chest. The eyes came closer, and the shape behind them stepped into the light. It looked like a mixture of metal and flesh, something grown and built at the same time. Long limbs, sharp claws, and thick armor-like skin that clicked when it moved. A jungle predator from another world, one that didn't fear humans or flames. Rylena moaned behind him, her voice too weak to form words. The creature twitched at the sound, eyes narrowing. Jace stepped forward and waved the torch wildly. Fire. Crackling, heat rising, the creature hissed, but didn't run. It lowered itself like it was preparing to jump. Jace threw a stone at its leg, yelling loud, "Back off." It paused, muscles tightening. Jace took a breath, then kicked the fire itself toward the cave entrance. The flames burst forward, and smoke filled the small space. The beast snarled and backed away, disappearing into the dark. The jungle swallowed it again. But Jace knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. He turned back to Rylena. Coughing from the smoke, she opened her eyes. Only halfway, You fought it, she whispered. He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. I'll fight more, if I have to. She tried to smile again, but her eyelids dropped slowly. Jace sat down beside her, heart still racing, hands still shaking. He held her hand gently and leaned his head back against the rock. The night wasn't over, and they weren't safe, but she was alive. And he was still standing. For now, that was enough. The night had swallowed the cave hole, not even the fire. Dared to speak now, Jace sat in silence, listening to the sounds of a jungle that refused to sleep. The growls came back, but softer this time, more curious than hungry. The beast was still out there, circling, waiting, testing their weakness like a predator that enjoyed the game. Inside, the fire flickered low, casting shaky shadows across the walls. Rylana still burned with fever, her skin damp and her eyes closed tight. He knelt beside her, holding a wet cloth against her forehead. Her breathing came fast and uneven, like she was fighting something inside that he couldn't see. Stay with me, he whispered. You've made it this far. She twitched, suddenly, her hands curling into fists, her mouth opening like she was trying to scream, but no sound came out. Only a rough breath and a whisper in her native tongue. Jace didn't know what she said, but it sounded like a name or maybe a goodbye. He didn't wait. He grabbed the tiny flare stick from his bag and lit it. The red glow filled the cave. For a few seconds, enough to scare back whatever was watching outside. He knew it wouldn't keep the jungle away forever. But it bought them time. A little more time was all he needed. Jace leaned over her, checked the bandage on her leg. The venom marks had spread further up, crawling like dark fingers under the skin. He cursed under his breath, then pulled his own jacket tighter. I pulled out the poison, he muttered. That should have been enough. Rylana stirred again. And her eyes opened for just a second. She looked at him, but not like before. Not like a soldier or an alien. She looked like someone afraid. Someone lost. Don't let me go, she whispered. Her voice cracked and dry. You're not going anywhere, he said, pressing her hand gently. Then her body went still. No shaking, no twitching. Just still. Jace froze, his hands hovering above her chest. Then relief, a breath, soft but steady. She was sleeping now, not fading, not dying, just resting. He sat back, arms resting on his knees, watching the flames dance low. The fear that had been clawing inside his chest finally broke open. He leaned his head forward and whispered, "Don't you dare die on me." For a moment, the cave felt like a coffin, small and full of quiet judgment. The shadows looked like faces, staring from the corners. All watching the same thing, man and a woman from different worlds, holding on to life by a thread. Suddenly, a new noise cut through the jungle air. Not the beast, not the wind. Something. Mechanical Jace grabbed his rifle, low on charge, and moved to the entrance. Far in the distance, across the trees, a blinking light appeared, faint but steady. Someone had activated a signal. And someone else had answered. He turned back too. Her eyes wide. Someone's out there, he said. We're not alone anymore. Rylana didn't respond. But a small smile appeared on her lips in her sleep. She had heard him somewhere inside that fever. Jace sat beside her again, holding her hand this time. Not just for her, but for himself. He realized then that she wasn't just a partner in this mission. She wasn't just an alien. She had become his reason for surviving. The jungle could have him if it wanted, but it would have to fight him for her first. He leaned against the wall once more, knife in hand, fire crackling low, and whispered into the dark, "We're not done yet." The sun had climbed halfway into the sky when Rylana's breathing changed. It wasn't as shallow anymore. It came deeper now, steadier, like her body was slowly fighting its way back. Jace sat beside her, eyes half closed, his body stiff from holding still for hours. He didn't sleep, not really. Just drifted in and out with the fire crackling and the jungle groaning in the distance. When she moved again, it was sudden, her hand twitching under the coat he had wrapped around her. He opened his eyes fast, sat up straight, and looked at her face. Then her eyes opened, fully this time, not halfway. Not dizzy, but clear. She blinked, confused at first, then slowly focused on him. "You look like death," she said. Her voice weak, but full of dry humor. Jace stared at her for a moment, then laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so her. "You're awake," he said, sitting closer. "You scared me half to death. You sucked poison from my thigh," she replied, smirking just a little. "I think I win." He rolled his eyes, but the weight in his chest started to melt away. She was talking, teasing, alive. "Welcome back," he said softly. Rylana tried to sit up, but winced, and fell back again, groaning. Jace reached out to help, but she waved his hand away. "Still hurts like fire," she whispered, "but I feel something better." For a while, they sat in silence. Her lying back on the soft cloth he had folded, and him just watching her face. She looked different now, not just because she was recovering. Something in her eyes had changed, softer around the edges, less distant. He stood and brought her some water. Holding it to her lips, she drank slowly, then leaned her head back and closed her eyes for a moment. "You could have left," she said again, barely above a whisper. "You could have run when I got bitten." "I didn't," he replied simply. "No, you didn't." She agreed, then turned to look at him. Her expression unreadable. "You risked yourself." Jace shrugged. "I couldn't just watch you die." She looked at him for a long time, like she was trying to see something beyond his words. Then her hand reached out and gently rested on his. "Where I'm from, what you did means something," she said, "a bond deeper than orders. Deeper than law." Jace didn't move, didn't speak. She added, "You probably didn't know that." "I didn't," he admitted. "I just didn't want to lose you, outside." The cave, something called in the distance. Not a roar, not a howl, something stranger. They both turned toward the sound, but neither of them moved. Jace said, "We need to get going soon. Relay station." She nodded. "About 2 days, if I was at full strength." He looked at her leg. "The skin's still bruised, but less swollen. I'll carry you," he said, without hesitation. Rylana blinked, as if surprised by his tone. "You're not afraid I'll slow you down?" "I don't leave people behind, remember?" She smiled again, this time not just a smirk, but something real, warm, rare. He packed up their things, what little they had, and helped her sit up slowly. Her hands shook as she adjusted the torn uniform, but she didn't ask for help. Still, Jace stood nearby, ready if she fell when she looked up at him. Her voice was lower. "I owe you more than I can explain." "You owe me nothing," he replied. "Just don't die." She laughed softly, then leaned against him as he crouched down. He lifted her onto his back, her arms wrapping around his neck, her cheek resting on his shoulder. "Comfy?" he asked, walking toward the exit of the cave. Surprisingly, "Yes," she whispered. Then, after a pause, "You're warmer than I expected." Jace smirked. "Don't get used to it." As they stepped into the daylight, the jungle was quiet, not peaceful, but waiting. The trees swayed like watchers, the air heavy with heat and warning. But Jace didn't care. He carried her forward, step by step, deeper into the wild. One human, one half-healed alien warrior, and a bond neither of them had expected. She tightened her grip slightly, and in that small motion, he felt something new. Not fear, not duty, trust. The kind that didn't need words. They moved through the jungle slowly, each step measured and silent. Jace's boots sank into the soft ground while vines brushed his arms and neck, Rylana clung to his back, arms loosely around his chest, her breathing warm against his neck. The jungle didn't speak much, that dead only listened. Bird-like shadows flew above the tree line, but never close. Even the insects kept their distance, as if they could feel something different walking. Beneath the trees, something that shouldn't have survived. A human carrying an alien noble, and neither of them willing to give up. Every few hours, Jace would stop, lower her gently to the ground, and offer water or food. She would try to walk, but her legs still trembled. Once, she took 3 steps on her own, then leaned back against a tree. Panting, he didn't tease her, didn't offer pity. Just gave her a quiet nod before kneeling down so she could climb onto his back again. The jungle watched them, but didn't strike, not like before. Maybe it respected them now, or maybe it was waiting for something worse. Near dusk, they found the broken bridge. The vines had taken over, swallowing the path that once stretched over a deep canyon. Rylana frowned, her voice quiet. "I forgot about this. How far down?" Jace asked, peering over the edge. "Too far," she said, "and if we fall, we're gone." Jace looked up, scanning the thick ropes and twisted beams. He handed her his coat, then pulled himself onto the nearest beam. It wobbled under his. "Wait, but held," Rylana called out. "You don't have to risk it." He turned, sweat dripping from his face. "I'm not turning back now." Hand over hand, he climbed across, tying old ropes together, testing each step. When it was ready, he came back, breathless, and lifted her again. "You trust me?" he asked. She looked at him for a long second, then said, "With my life." Crossing the bridge was slow and painful. Jace felt every crack in the wood, every twist in the wind. Below them, birds circled, hoping for a fall, but he made it across, knees shaking, hands bleeding when they reached the other side. She slid off his back slowly. "You're not just a soldier," she whispered. "You're something else." He didn't answer, just collapsed beside her, staring at the purple sky above. The stars were coming out now, small and sharp-like memories. Rylana watched him quietly, her expression softer than ever before. She leaned closer and rested her head against his shoulder. It was the first time she had touched him without injury, without weakness, just a moment shared. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said. Jace turned his head slightly. "What does it mean?" "In my culture," she said slowly, "when someone carries you through danger, shares their body heat, bleeds for you, it's not forgotten." He was quiet for a second, then said, "I didn't do it for a reward." "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." A small animal passed nearby, sniffing but didn't come close. The fire they built was small and smokeless, just enough to keep them warm. Jace's muscles ached, but he didn't complain. And Rylana didn't speak again for a while. She just sat close to him, hands tucked under her cloak. Later that night, she broke the silence again. "When this mission started, I didn't trust humans. I noticed," he said with a small grin. "I thought you were weak," she admitted, "too soft, and now I think softness might be your strength." He looked at her, surprised. She added, "Your kind doesn't run from pain. You run toward it." "I'm not special," Jace said. "Any good person would have done what I did." She shook her head. No, they wouldn't. There was something in her voice, quiet truth that needed no argument. She reached out, not to touch him this time, but to place her hand beside his, palm flat against the ground. Not touching, but close. He didn't move away that night. They didn't sleep far apart like before. The space between them closed slowly, naturally, without words. And when her fingers found his under the starlight, he didn't pull away. The jungle was still awake, but it didn't come for them. Maybe it had seen enough, or maybe, for once, it had no power over a bond that had already survived death, venom, and fire. The tower rose like a black fang above the trees, silent and watching. It wasn't grand or clean, it was rusted, half broken and leaning slightly to the east. But to Jace and Rilona, it was the most beautiful thing in the world, the relay station finally in sight after 2 long days of pain, fear, and silence. Jace's legs trembled with every step, his shoulders screaming under the weight, but he didn't stop. Not even when sweat blurred his vision or his knees nearly buckled. Rilona rested against his back, lighter now, her breath calmer, her voice steadier. She had wanted to walk, but he had refused, and she didn't argue anymore. The ground here was flatter, the air cooler, and for once, the jungle seemed to bow. Away, no snake bites, no hidden beasts, no venom in the blood, just the sound of wind in the trees and the hum of ancient tech waiting to be touched. Jace reached the rusted door and lowered her gently to the ground. She stood, just barely, one hand on his shoulder, the other pressed to her healing leg. He turned to her, and their eyes met not as soldier and officer, not as alien and human, but as 2 souls who had bled and burned through the wild. Together, Rilena stepped forward and pressed her palm against the scanner. A low beep sounded, followed by a heavy clunk. The door slid open with a sigh, and warm light spilled out from the dark interior. Inside, old machines came to life, screens flickered, systems buzzed. Jace helped her to the COM panel, and she tapped a few glowing keys with shaky fingers. A blue signal lit up on the screen, followed by a pulsing line. A voice spoke in her language alert, then surprised, then overjoyed. She answered calmly, clearly, but her fingers trembled when she finished. "They're sending a dropship," she said softly. 2 hours. Jace let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Good," he replied, sitting down on the metal floor, legs stretched out. "Very good." Rilona joined him, slow and careful, her shoulder brushing his. They sat in silence, letting the soft hum of power surround them. This place felt like a tomb and a temple at the same time. A forgotten station that had become the edge of something new. "I'll be taken back to command," she said, looking straight ahead. He nodded. "Yeah, figures. They'll ask what happened." He looked at her. "You'll tell them I saved you." "I'll tell them the truth," she said, then turned to him. "You did more than save me." Jace didn't answer. He just looked at her, really looked. Her hair was messy, her uniform torn, her legs still wrapped in old cloth. But her eyes were clear, burning with something more than duty. He felt it before he even understood it. She reached into her gear and pulled out a small Symbol silver coin with her crest. She placed it into his hand, closing his fingers around it. "In my culture, this is a life token," she whispered. "It means I owe you my future." He stared at the coin, unsure. "I didn't do this for favors," he said. "I know." She smiled. "That's why it matters." The dropship arrived, with the roar of wind and light cutting through the trees like a blade. Soldiers ran down the ramp, weapons ready, eyes wide. They paused when they saw her bruised but standing. Supported by a human, one of the officers ran forward, bowing deeply. "Commander." "We thought you were dead," Rilona answered, her voice strong. "I was close, but he didn't let me die." All eyes turned to Jace, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the officer stepped aside and nodded. Jace helped her onto the ship, sat beside her, and let the wind carry them into the sky. Later, when she stood before the High Council, Jace was called to speak. He expected questions, suspicion, maybe even punishment for touching a noble and such. Away, but when he looked to the side, she was already standing, her voice louder than ever. "I name this human my savior," she declared, "and by our oldest law my chosen." Gasps filled the hall. Murmurs rippled through the ranks, but no one dared to question her. Not after what she survived, not after what he did. Jace didn't speak. Didn't need to. The bond had already spoken louder than words. And in the quiet that followed, Rylana stepped down from the platform and stood beside him. Her fingers reached for his again, not as a soldier, not as a symbol, but as someone who had walked through death with him and returned together.